Hello, everyone, and welcome to VIDA News Live. I'm your host, Dom Garrett, and today is Friday, June 12th, 2020. My guest a little later on the program is Chim Ngoma. He is the project manager of Tobacco Harm Reduction Malawi. He and I are going to have a nice conversation. We're going to discuss his tobacco harm reduction journey, the socioeconomic impact of tobacco on Malawi, and we're also going to talk about the work that his organization is doing. We will also give you an update on Ray Yeates, and we'll wrap up our coverage of the Global Forum on Nicotine, which ended just about 2 hours ago. But first, I wanted to tell everybody about a new study. It was published last Friday, and it shows that flavors and flavored e-cigarettes are indeed associated with increased smoking cessation in adults, but not with the increased initiation of youth smoking. The study, which was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, set out to examine if there was that association between smoking cessation and e-cigarettes. The author of the study, Dr. Abigail Friedman, I'm sorry about that. She is the associate professor of the Department of Public Health at the Yale School of Public Health. Among her findings, Dr. Friedman found that adults that switched from smoking to non-tobacco flavored nicotine vapor products were 2.3 times as likely to quit as those smokers that switched to tobacco flavored products. The study, as I also said, concluded that flavors are not associated with increased numbers of youth vaping, which, as we can tell, is a pretty big deal. One of the things that we hear constantly from the anti-vaping advocates and activists that are out there is that flavored nicotine products attract youth. But this study is the first in hopefully many studies that are going to come out to say exactly that. Another interesting point is that the study's findings, and Dr. Friedman was very vocal in talking about how the idea of states, especially here in the United States, banning flavored nicotine products, she said was too blunt of an instrument and actually could have the opposite effect. That if you end up doing that, more people might end up switching back to smoking, which, as we know, is kind of the opposite of what we want to have happen. We will make sure to follow this story and be able to give you more in-depth coverage of it on our website at vida.news. So next, let's talk about the Global Forum on Nicotine. It wrapped up its coverage today. I'm really excited because our guest later on the program actually was a presenter there at the Global Forum on Nicotine. There was a couple of topics today. There was the cost and benefits of tobacco harm reduction. There was also there's the cost and benefits of tobacco harm reduction. They talked a bit about policy, but one thing that I wanted to take just a second to talk about here is the idea of COVID-19 and the challenges that we have with tobacco harm reduction science. The first chunk of the conference today focused very specifically on that. The first presenter was Dr. Riccardo Pelosa. He is actually the founder of the Center of Excellence for the Acceleration of Harm Reduction in Italy. He really set the groundwork about what we know about the ties between smoking and vaping and COVID-19. Now, as you may know, as soon as COVID-19 started to get a lot more coverage here in the United States, there was a lot of leaders that stepped out, including the Surgeon General, different mayors and governors, such as Governor Cuomo in New York. And they said that if you smoke or if you vape, you're at higher risk for COVID-19. Now, a lot of that information was just based on the fact that we knew that COVID-19 was a respiratory illness. And so they just automatically made that assumption. However, there was a lot of scientists, many of which spoke today, that actually looked into the clinical data. They wanted to see, was there any correlation between smoking and hospitalization or death from COVID-19? There was data out of Israel, but there was one in particular data set, the largest of its kind, that was discussed both by Dr. Pelosa and Dr. Konstantinos Farsalinos today, that was out of Mexico. It was a very large sample set. We're talking almost 250,000 people that were tested for COVID-19. And we actually found, and by the way, this data was released by the Mexican Health Ministry themselves. This is not just somebody independent. This was the government of Mexico releasing this data. And it actually shows that smokers were 23% less likely to test positive for COVID-19 as opposed to non-smokers. Now, some people take this, and as we see the news cycle, if you've been following along the last couple of weeks, you saw that immediately everybody was like, okay, yes, smoking, vaping, it actually prevents you from getting that. Now that is definitely a step too far, and a lot of people wanted to pump the brakes there. Because what we need to do is, I'm going to give everybody a little bit of a biology lesson, and this is, what we actually learned today in the conference. But there is a specific receptor in the brain. It's called the AC2 receptor, and this enzyme, it's actually a pretty big deal. It does really great things for the body. It promotes blood flow. It stops inflammation. It's really good for multiple organs, including your lungs and different really important vital organs inside of your body. Now, it was thought for a long time that smoking actually tapped that receptor down. So, it would just sort of not necessarily promote blood flow. It wasn't really good for tissue health. However, a recent study in this year, 2020, showed that it actually has the opposite effect. Smoking and nicotine actually increases those. It upscales them, which promotes more blood flow. However, if you're paying attention to virologists, that tends to leave people more susceptible to different viral infections. And so then all of a sudden you have the news flip to the other side. And they're like, science and studies prove that you are more susceptible to this. Well, Dr. Konstantinos Farsalinos today took it just a little bit further for all of us. And he let us, the science actually shows that what COVID-19 does is that it massively downs those receptors. So you're down leveling them, and that actually can cause massive inflammation. It can cause secondary infection, and in the worst case, that can cause death. And so what you have here is you have a little bit of a both and scenario. You have something where nicotine actually helps increase the amount of those receptors in that enzyme. So it might actually work as a little bit of a benefit. But the science on that is not proven. Every single one of the scientists today said there is no definitive proof that nicotine or smoking prevents you from getting COVID-19. But one thing that they did say, and this is important for us to be able to say here, is that the case is closed. You are not more susceptible to having COVID-19 or contracting COVID-19 if you are a smoker, if you are somebody who uses vapor products, or if you're somebody who uses alternative nicotine. So there was a lot of really interesting information and all of that. There was also Pinny Matzer. He is the senior data analyst and the data team lead at Signals Analytics. He gave a presentation about the media coverage, the social media coverage, how people were talking about this. So we're talking some big data type things to be able to figure out what these trends are. Now, while this is a little bit looking back in the past to see how early these trends may have started, this is the type of information that is definitely going to help all of us moving forward to be able to tell so that we can tell what trends are happening in the future. We also heard from Dr. Roberto Sussman. Dr. Roberto Sussman is at the National University of Mexico. He's well known in the harm reduction space. He's also an astrophysicist, which is just pretty amazing. But he combed through all of the different studies. And what Dr. Sussman has done quite recently is focused not necessarily just on the science, but how bad science and how the information of that science has ended up impacting consumers. As you know, there have been a lot of different bans. There have been a lot of vape shops in the United States, both here and outside around the world, that were deemed non-essential because government leaders and policy health experts thought that this would cause people to be more susceptible, so they wouldn't want those things to be open. But unfortunately, that has unintended consequences. A couple of the ones that Dr. Sussman discussed, that this might actually end up to people going back to smoking. Maybe they were using these products and they ended up going back to smoking because it was easier to get them. It could be something that stops people from making the switch in the first place. Or even in the worst case scenario, people still want to do that. They don't have the access to the products because the government has mislabeled them as giving people more, making them more susceptible to the virus. And then what that ends up doing is creating a black market scenario. And as we know from things like Avali, which was not from vaping, but was from illicit THC vapes, that could potentially happen. It hasn't happened yet, thankfully, but there are unintended consequences. There's a long tail here. I did make sure to ask all of the panelists in a Q&A afterwards if there is any data right now on alternative forms of nicotine. A lot of this data was just about smokers, people that smoke cigarettes. I'm sure I should say people that smoke cigarettes. A lot of the data is just on people that smoke cigarettes, and not on alternative nicotine products, not on snus. There is a lot of data that is yet to be combed through. There are a lot of experiments. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of studies that are going to be happening. And we will continue to handle all of those here on VIDA News. So make sure to please follow along with us as we touch on all of that. I will say that overall, final thoughts for the Global Forum on Nicotine. It was really amazing to see the walls come down around the conversation with harm reduction. Things like the WHO and COP9, which was postponed to next year, a lot of that happens behind closed doors. These conversations are had between a small group of people. But what the Global Forum on Nicotine did is, very much what we are trying to do here with VIDA News. We want to make this accessible to everyone, whether you are a consumer, whether you are an academic, perhaps you are a public health expert, you might be a medical professional. This is a conversation that we all need to have. Everybody needs to come together around this table, have open, healthy discourse. We're not always going to agree with each other. But as I said on the program yesterday, if we can take this new information, if we can be open to change our own minds, then hopefully other people can be open to change theirs, and we can all move forward together to do what we all want to do. Just what Louise Ross said yesterday: less smoking, more birthdays. That's what we're all for. Speaking of more birthdays, I would like to update everybody on the story of Ray Yates. A couple of weeks ago, we discussed Ray's story. You can see the full story on our website. We will drop the link down below in just a minute. But Ray, unfortunately, due to the fact that he used alternative nicotine products and the fact that there was backward policies and a lack of education in a specific government care service in Nova Scotia, Ray was really in a fight for his life. He was separated from the woman that he loved. He was denied placement in an assisted living facility with her, and they actually were threatening to take away his oxygen machine because he used alternative nicotine products. We discussed Ray's story. We shared a GoFundMe. I want to let everybody know that GoFundMe is about halfway done. Ray is not completely out of the woods yet, so please make sure to go check that out. You can see right below me, vida.news/Ray for that entire story. But I actually had a chance to catch up with Ray yesterday. The thing that he wanted me to say more than anything is thank you. The fact that we were able to get his story out there and that you did the job of making sure to share that far and wide, that put pressure on that organization, Continuing Care in Nova Scotia. Ray now knows that at least for the next 3 months, he does not have to worry about any problems with his oxygen, which is absolutely amazing. The woman that we discussed in our story gave hope, took away hope, was using incredibly stigmatized language with Ray, really shaming him for the fact that he was using these alternative nicotine products, telling him he has to clean himself up. Well, she is leaving that organization, and Ray has now been in contact with her supervisor. They are providing Ray with meals right now, which definitely helps because as we mentioned on this broadcast, Ray only gets a certain amount in retirement benefits, and he is still living month to month in the motel in Nova Scotia. However, when I spoke to him, he was in much higher spirits. It was he wanted to express deep gratitude. But the wonderful thing about Ray, and this is, when I asked him, I was like, I will make sure to tell everybody thank you. But do you have any other messages for anybody else? And in true Ray fashion, he took it completely off himself. And he said that he wants to continue fighting that this community needs to continue pushing forward, because he's not worried about himself. He's worried about the next person, because Ray's story is not just happening in a vacuum. There are Rays all over Canada, all over North America, all over the world that are being, frankly, discriminated against because of the choice that they use. They are being stigmatized because people do not have the correct information, because they do not understand this. And he wants to make sure that this does not happen to anyone else. So please take this opportunity to visit the link below, vida.news/Ray. I encourage you to go to that GoFundMe and donate if you can. Ray would definitely appreciate it. But the message he wants that to get spread far and wide, that this is not a fight that is over. It is something that we have to keep working on changing hearts, keep working on trying to change legislation. So that is what we have with Ray. And now I am very excited to welcome our guest to the program. Our guest today is Chim Ngoma. As I mentioned, he is the project manager of Tobacco Harm Reduction Malawi. He gave a presentation at Global Forum on Nicotine today, speaking very much about the tobacco-driven economy of Malawi, and how to change the perceptions and start working towards safer nicotine. So I'm very excited to welcome him onto the program. How are you doing today, Jim?
Thank you very much for having me, Ron. I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm very glad that that we have a chance to sit down. As I mentioned to Clive yesterday, I'm a little bummed that we can't do this in Poland together. We'll just have to save that for next year. So just to get started, Jim, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your journey. You are the project manager for Tobacco Harm Reduction Malawi, but I would love to just know sort of how you got into this space and how you found yourself as a part of this battle.
All right, so I got introduced to the tobacco harm reduction concept by the Tobacco Harm Reduction Scholarships under the Knowledge Action Change. And since then, I decided to take on the battle against smoking and to advocate for good public health and a smoke-free world by giving information on smoking associated harms and tobacco harm reduction to smokers back here in Malawi, and the health professionals and other advocates who are dealing with people who are struggling with the habit of smoking. So it is from this where I developed the Tobacco Harm Reduction Malawi project to propel the initiatives.
So in your presentation today, you mentioned that there is a narrative in Malawi. Now, obviously, Malawi is, as you said, a tobacco-driven economy. A large portion of the GDP is really wrapped up in the agriculture, the export of tobacco, and that there is a narrative that adopting some anti-smoking or harm reduction measures could result in economic hardship. Do you know exactly where that narrative started? Is that a media narrative that is happening inside of the country, or is there messages that are coming from outside?
All right, so tobacco has been a main forex earner for Malawi. It has helped us to develop the country. It has helped us to build our country, and it has helped the smallholder tobacco farmers to educate their children and to build their homes. So this is a narrative that has been created from within Malawi. And for your own information, I would say that some stakeholders and some people refer to the tobacco leaf as the green gold for Malawi. So it's sometimes known as Malawi's green gold. So it's a narrative that has been built locally.
Okay. And so obviously that is a large part of the economy. What is the smoking prevalence in Malawi? Are there a lot of combustible tobacco smokers in the country?
All right, so I can just refer you to the Global State of Tobacco Harm Reduction Report. They extracted their information from the WHO's reports and the Tobacco Atlas reports. It is stated that in the population of 18 million plus, we have about 1 million daily adult smokers here in Malawi. So that's how we can weigh the prevalence on smoking here in Malawi.
Okay. And what does the tobacco control policy look like in Malawi? Obviously, your organization is doing work, but what is the regulations around alternative products right now?
All right. So as I indicated earlier on, to say that tobacco has helped to build our economy. It has helped to build our country. Anything that comes, any efforts that are there to derail or to that are suspected to affect the market for tobacco or the production of tobacco, they are fought aggressively or they are not taken seriously. So you'll be surprised to hear that there are no serious tobacco related policies back here in Malawi because there is reluctance by the relevant stakeholders to take on the initiative to to do some sort of tobacco policies that can be coherent across the economic and health sectors. So there might be some policies, but which only deal with the production of tobacco and not necessarily the healthy part or the intersection.
Ah, okay. In your presentation, I wanted to speak to something in particular. Like you obviously have, and you've shared, there are people that when you share your messages with Tobacco Harm Reduction Malawi, you get a little bit of pushback. People are afraid that they're associating anti-smoking with anti-tobacco or the elimination of it. And you mentioned that there needs to be some education about the potential of creating like low-tech alternative tobacco and alternative nicotine products. What exactly what products are you speaking about exactly with that?
All right, so the low sulfur nicotine products which are of low tech, which can be locally feasible and culturally acceptable, could be something like a snus like product. Because back here in Malawi, you might have learned that our economy is not as good as um, other countries, and for people to afford the other safer nicotine products like vapes, it's a bit of a problem. For your own information, uh, an average cost of a vaping product here in Malawi ranges between $50 to $75. For an average smoker, they can't afford that. So um, for us to go ahead to advocate for safer nicotine products, they should be locally feasible and culturally acceptable and economically feasible. So these products which I'm talking about, like the vaping products, are not economically feasible. Some people use them, but they are those who are financially advantaged. But for the people who are not financially advantaged, it is a bit of a problem for them to access these vaping products. So an alternative for them could be a low-tech safer nicotine product like snus. So it's just a matter of innovators and researchers to develop something. It might not be like it might not be snus per se, but if it can be something that is snus like, that can be culturally acceptable, I think it can help the local smokers to access the safer nicotine products and have an opportunity to switch.
Definitely. So can you tell me a little bit more about the project, with Tobacco Harm Reduction Malawi? Like, what is, obviously there's a large mission that you have, but what are some of the challenges? What are some of the conversations that you are having with people right now?
All right, so as I mentioned, that THR Malawi is an information dissemination project on tobacco harm reduction and nicotine science, with an aim of giving authenticated and scientifically proven information on tobacco harm reduction and on, of course, nicotine, so that smokers here back in Malawi should have access to these, to this information, so that they should be able to make informed decisions regarding their health. So the project has been employing a website, social media platforms, television, radio, and newspaper appearances to disseminate this information. On top of that, we have been employing volunteer ambassadors. We have over 77 volunteer ambassadors across Malawi,
Wow.
coming from a diverse academic and professional backgrounds. And we have a few more from South Africa and one from Zimbabwe, who are helping and sharing tobacco harm reduction information to their peers who are struggling with the habit of smoking. On top of that, we have been undertaking orientation sessions to media and health experts here in Malawi, so that they have the true information about what tobacco harm reduction is, so that they can share it to the general masses and to people or their patients who are struggling with the habit of smoking. That is for the health professionals. On challenges, I would say that we have mainly encountered negative comments due to wrong information that people have towards safer nicotine advocacy and tobacco itself. You agree with me that a lot of people, most of us, have grown up in a society that demonize and constantly persecute nicotine. So some people relate nicotine to the harmful substances that are found in combustible cigarettes like tar. So that is a very big problem, because um, people come with a wrong perception to say that nicotine is dangerous. So it is a barrier to our information dissemination. So some of this wrong information has been compounded by some media outlets who have been propelling wrong information about what safer nicotine products are, what nicotine is. An example of such could be the reports on the EVALI outbreak, which happened in the USA. Some media outlets uh, attributed the EVALI outbreak to vaping nicotine. And this information has been reaching people back here in Malawi. So when we are doing our advocacy work, we constantly encountered questions on the EVALI outbreak and it's as the vaping products being associated to EVALI outbreak. So it was some sort of a barrier. We had to start from clearing out this misconception about the EVALI outbreak, that and detaching safer nicotine products, that they are not the cause of the EVALI outbreak, and then go ahead with advocacy campaigns. On top of that, I would say that since some people back in Malawi assume that the safer nicotine advocacy is the same as a no tobacco campaign, as we discussed earlier on, we said that tobacco is one of the Malawi's main forex earners. So some people, since they relate to, they relate the safer nicotine advocacy to a no tobacco campaign. They think that this campaign would affect um, the economy of the country. So we now and then encounter some resistance and some negative comments because they are misinformed or they have wrong perceptions towards safer nicotine advocacy, and tobacco itself.
Yes, it's interesting that point that you made about a volley, and that's important for our audience to be able to know that things like that happen. I think Julie Wosner actually said it best. She said that the number one export of the United States, unfortunately, in this fight is misinformation. And that is so true when it comes to a volley. And you can have retraction after correction, but they never quite have the same power as that first thought that gets stuck in people's heads. So how are you really fighting to be able to counteract that? Is it like face to face? I know you mentioned some of the different campaigns. I know that probably coronavirus makes that a little bit more difficult. Is most of it like digital that you're doing, or are you trying to do things on television and print as well?
All right, so we've been having some radio, television, and newspaper appearances to disseminate this information, but we are also full-time on Twitter and Facebook, which are the main social media platforms that are being used here in Malawi. That's on top of the website that we constantly update or share our resources on tobacco harm reduction and nicotine science. So in the wake of COVID-19, these have been our main tools for giving out the information to the general masses. But I'm sure that once we bounce back to our normal daily routines and we're allowed to have physical meetings, we'll continue with live workshops and sessions to share the information.
Wonderful. One question I did want to ask as well. I know that you mentioned, some volunteers and people from neighboring countries. We did a special report on some organizations, much like yours, but in South America, that were sort of banding together and creating an alliance. Is there a lot of working together between the different tobacco harm reduction organizations throughout Africa?
Oh, yes. There has been some massive work together projects by a number of tobacco harm reduction groups here in Africa. There are a number of them, and most of them subscribe to Campaign for Safe Alternatives. I'm sure you have heard about it, and it's very active on Twitter and other social media platforms. So we work together as Africans in advocating for safer nicotine products for the over 77 million smokers across Africa. So we have THR Congo, we have THR Nigeria, THR Kenya, and a few other more who are working together, who come together for joint projects, mainly online ones, to share the information on tobacco harm reduction and um, uh, nicotine science to the general public. We've also been having some Twitter chats with some experts from various fields, including Clive Betts. We've hosted Clive Betts on one of our Twitter chats, and we have been sharing such information to our local networks.
That is wonderful. Clive is such a wonderful resource, and it's really it's encouraging to see how the community itself is able to come together, and you're all able to work together to move towards a shared goal and a common mission. One question I did want to ask you as well, specifically about agriculture, and I know that you mentioned this in your presentation today, but you were mentioning some potential working with farmers to diversify the agriculture, so that if there is, say, less tobacco, even though it's not the same thing, anti-smoking and anti-tobacco, Can you talk a little bit about some of those projects that are working to help farmers diversify their crops?
All right, so you might have heard about the Agriculture Transformation Initiative by the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. So this initiative has come in response to the market uncertainty as a result of continued decrease in demand for tobacco on the global market. So it's a project that is helping smallholder tobacco farmers to diversify tobacco farming with alternative livelihood opportunities. So this is one of the big projects by the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World, which is trying to help the smallholder tobacco farmers here in Malawi to diversify their livelihood opportunities. On top of that, we have some research or institutions which are trying to localize some cash crops that can be equally or more profitable than tobacco. And an example of such is the industry hemp. They have been trying to localize industry hemp and Solaris, which have multiple uses, and they can and they have some good demand on the global market.
Wonderful. Well, Chim, I thank you so much for joining our program today. For our audience who may want to see the work that you're doing, where can everybody find your work? Where can they connect with you?
All right, so they can connect with us on Twitter. We go with the username at THR Malawi, and we're there on Facebook. And from there, you can find our websites and our email addresses. So we are more than willing to have so many people join the cause and be part of the community of change makers in advocating for safer nicotine products here in Malawi and across Africa.
Wonderful. Well, Chim, I am so glad to count you as a friend of our program, and I have no doubt that we will have you on again very soon. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That is our program for the day. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure to sign up for our weekly email newsletter. We have a lot of coverage that is going to be coming up. As we discussed at the top of yesterday's broadcast, we are beginning a conversation about systematic racism inside of tobacco control policy. We have stories out of India. We have stories out of Southeast Asia that we're going to be sharing. We will be sharing our full conversation with Chris Garland. And you can always make sure to follow us on social media to get all of the clips of these broadcasts and to continue the conversation. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.